In October 2014, the Leeds City Council in the UK launched a pilot program called the Managed Approach. It aimed to reduce the violent crimes faced by sex workers and improve local security by allowing sex transactions to be legally conducted in specific areas and time periods. Initial data showed that violent crimes related to sex transactions indeed decreased. However, as time went by, the drawbacks of the program gradually emerged. On one hand, the legalization of sex transactions led to disorder in the community environment, severely affecting the daily lives of residents. On the other hand, the safety of sex workers was not fundamentally improved. In the end, the program had to be abandoned as a failure. So, given the many drawbacks of the program, why did the Leeds City Council still attempt to implement this seemingly trouble-prone initiative to help those who are neglected by society and living on the margins? The answer lies within the history of crime in the UK. Whether it was Jack the Ripper, the Yorkshire Ripper, or Jack the Stripper, these notorious serial killers took pleasure in hunting sex workers, creating social panic with their horrifying methods. But the tragedy of history always repeats itself. Although their active periods were in the 19th and 20th centuries, and their terror has been consigned to history, just a few years before the program was launched, Steven Wright, known as the Suffolk Strangler, committed similar crimes. His actions eventually triggered public concerns about the safety of sex workers and the re-examination of prostitution laws. So, why did his crimes attract such widespread attention, and on what basis could he be compared to the Yorkshire Ripper, who murdered 13 victims? Unlike those serial killers who were active in the past, the answer lies in the fact that, first, his case occurred as recently as 2006. And second, Steven, the killer himself, was also someone living on the margins of society. Before becoming a serial killer, he was a loser, with 2 broken marriages, a gambling addiction, long-term alcoholism, no career achievements, only able to wander between bars and clubs near the port and the red light district. He was not a born demon, but rather the result of a series of failures, traumas, and social struggles. On April 24, 1958, Steven was born in the Norfolk village of Erpingham. He was the second of 4 children in his family. His father served as a military policeman, and his mother worked as a veterinary nurse. However, this seemingly stable family underwent a dramatic change in 1964 when Steven's mother, Patricia, chose to leave home. Later, in the subsequent years of his childhood, due to his father's frequent military relocations, Steven and his siblings were moved around like pieces of luggage, being sent to places such as Malta and Singapore. In 1978, age 20, Steven did something that many young people do. He got married. He settled down with a girl named Angela in Wales, and they soon had a son, Michael. On the surface, it seemed Steven was making an effort to follow a conventional path. However, the good times did not last. By 1987, when Michael was around 9 years old, Steven and Angela decided to separate, and their marriage eventually ended in divorce. That same year, Steven married another woman named Diane, but this marriage was even shorter-lived, lasting less than a year. Steven's marriage to Diane also revealed an unsettling fact to everyone. Domestic violence was a common part of his relationships with women. During Steven's marriage to Diane, neighbors often witnessed scenes of him being violent. It was said that Steven could instantly switch from a normal conversation to choking Diane, only stopping his assault when others intervened. After divorcing Diane, the 30-year-old Steven became the manager of a bar in Norwich. He also attempted to run another bar in South London. However, it was in London that he was exposed to and became addicted to gambling. His alcoholism also worsened, and in the end, his gambling and drinking habits cost him the opportunity to manage the bars. Entering the 1990s, due to long-term gambling and alcoholism, Steven accumulated massive debts and declared bankruptcy. Later, his sense of hopelessness and inner pain manifested in an extreme way. In 1994 and 2000, he attempted suicide twice. Once, he tried to kill himself in his car by carbon monoxide poisoning, and the other time, he overdosed on pills. Steven, who failed to die in both attempts, decided to take a desperate risk to repay his debts. In 2001, he stole £80 and was arrested and convicted of theft. This case was Steven's only criminal record before he committed murder. After experiencing a series of life setbacks, Steven met his new girlfriend, a woman named Pamela. In 2004, they moved in together to a house in Ipswich and began living as a couple. By 2006, Steven, who had once dreamed of being a chef, had been married twice, run bars, and lost everything, had finally settled into his last formal job as a forklift driver. Later, while Pamela started working night shifts and their intimate relationship almost ceased to exist, Steven revealed his hidden nature. He began frequenting places known as massage parlors and saunas, which he knew actually provided sexual services, and his purpose was to seek those services. Steven later admitted that he had a habit of soliciting prostitutes in his life, which began when he was young and working on a merchant ship. In this way, the man often found himself in areas filled with gray transactions and marginalized people. In the last 3 months of 2006, the concentrated period before the tragedies occurred, Steven paid for sexual services from at least 15 women. Among them were 3 women who later became victims of his murders. On December 2, 2006, a water police officer patrolling the Belstead Brook near Hintlesham in Suffolk discovered the naked body of a young woman. The forensic examination indicated that she had not been sexually assaulted, but the cause of death could not be confirmed. Later, the victim was identified as Gemma, a 25-year-old drug user and sex worker. Gemma came from a middle-class family and had once lived a popular life. However, during her youth, she became addicted to heroin. The drug addiction caused her to lose her parents' affection and her job. In the end, unable to quit drugs, she resorted to sex work to fund her drug purchases. While the police were fully investigating this case, just 6 days later, on the 8th, another naked female body was found in the waters outside Ipswich. The victim was Tanya, a 19-year-old friend of Gemma's, who had been reported missing since October 30th. Like Gemma, she was addicted to heroin and cocaine and engaged in sex work in Ipswich's red light district to support her drug habit. Before her death, her mother still believed she was working in a hair salon. On the 10th, a member of the public discovered the third victim, 24-year-old Anneli, in a woodland by the roadside near Nacton. Her cause of death was asphyxiation, and she had been 3 months pregnant at the time of her death. In addition to her unborn child, Anneli was also a mother. Her world had collapsed at the age of 16 when she witnessed her father's death from lung cancer, after which she began using drugs. The successive discovery of female bodies put the local police on high alert. At a press conference, investigators had to issue an urgent warning for all women to stay away from Ipswich's red light district. However, this could not prevent further tragedies. On the 12th, police reluctantly announced that they had found 2 more female victims. As the investigation progressed, the identities of the 2 victims were also confirmed one by one. The first victim was 24-year-old Paula, who had gone missing on the 10th and died from compression to the throat. She was also a drug user and sex worker, and she had 3 children with her partner. Before her death, Paula told the media that, despite her fear, she had to continue working out of economic necessity. The other victim was 29-year-old Annette, the oldest of the 5 victims and also a mother, as well as a drug user and sex worker. They were found near the location where Anneli had been killed. A member of the public first discovered Paula's body, and then a police helicopter found Annette's remains nearby. At the same time, the local police formally connected these murders and launched an investigation codenamed Operation Sumac. In order to ease public pressure, the chief superintendent revealed several pieces of information at a press conference. They believed that the locations where the remains were found were merely where the remains were dumped, not the original crime scenes. He also disclosed that they had found some women's clothing and accessories discarded by the murderer, which were undergoing forensic testing. As time went on, the scale of the investigation rapidly expanded and gradually evolved into a nationwide police mobilization that attracted significant attention. The chief constable of the local police publicly declared that, based solely on their capabilities, they could no longer solve this serial murder case and had to rely on external assistance. The entire city of Ipswich, and indeed the whole of the UK, was shrouded in the terrifying shadow of the murderer. Both the public and the police knew that they had to race against time because, with each passing second, the risk of the murderer committing another crime and disappearing into the crowd increased. On the 15th, over 300 police officers were involved in the investigation, and a cumulative total of 7,300 tip-off calls from the public had been received. By the 18th, not only had the number of officers involved in the investigation increased to 650, but the number of tip-off calls from the public had also reached approximately 10,000. Meanwhile, the local police announced that they had arrested a 37-year-old man suspected of murdering all 5 women. But the real breakthrough in the case occurred on the 19th when the police arrested a second suspect, 48-year-old Steven Wright, at a residence in Ipswich. 3 days later, following intense questioning, the local police and the Crown Prosecution Service jointly announced that they were formally charging Steven with all 5 murders. The 37-year-old man who was initially arrested was later cleared of suspicion in the subsequent investigation. January 16, 2008, Steven's formal trial began. The prosecution presented a tightly knit chain of evidence, while Steven's defense was riddled with holes. He claimed that he frequently sought out sex workers and had consensual sexual encounters with all the victims except Tanya. He argued that he had intended to have sex with Tanya but changed his mind and sent her back to the red light district. This contradicted his earlier excuse when he was stopped by the police, claiming he didn't know he was in the red light district and was just driving around because he couldn't sleep. And then the judge addressed the jury, saying that the loss of 5 young lives was clearly a tragedy. You may feel sympathy for the deceased and their families, but your sympathy must not sway your judgment. You might also feel some revulsion towards their lifestyle, but no matter what drugs they used or what work they did, no one has the right to harm these women, let alone kill them. On February 21, 2008, after just 8 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Steven guilty on all 5 counts of murder. At the sentencing, the judge stated that the murders involved a considerable degree of premeditation and planning, and therefore sentenced Steven to life imprisonment, recommending that he never be released on parole. The conclusion of the case also brought mixed emotions to the victims' families. Paula's family expressed their outrage at the lack of the death penalty, while Gemma's father felt a glimmer of relief. It's all over now, and we can finally start to move on with our lives. Despite being sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation of never being released, Steven did not immediately plead guilty and accept the verdict. In March 2008, he formally announced that he would appeal his conviction and sentence. His grounds for appeal were that the trial location in Ipswich had prevented him from receiving a fair trial, and he insisted that the evidence against him was insufficient for a conviction. He even wrote to the Court of Appeal, stating, "All 5 women were stripped of their clothes, jewelry, mobile phones, and bags, yet none of these items were found in his house or car." However, Steven's resistance appeared feeble in the face of the law. His first appeal was rejected by the court in July 2008, although there were later reports that he would launch a new appeal. Eventually, in February 2009, Steven announced that he had decided to drop all appeals. Steven's story did not end with his imprisonment. On the contrary, as time went by, more of his crimes were uncovered. The murder of Susanna Lamplugh in July 1986, the murder of Jeanette Kempton in 1989, and the murder of Natalie Pearman in November 1992, the disappearance of Amanda Duncan in July 1993, the murder of Victoria Hall in September 1999, the disappearance of Kelly Pratt in June 2000, the murder of Vicky Glass in September 2000, and the murder of Michelle Bettles in March 2002. Among these unsolved cases, only one murder has been directly linked to Steven so far, namely, the murder of Victoria Hall. Hall was a 17-year-old female student who went missing on her way home from a nightclub, and her body was found in a ditch 5 days after she disappeared. In 2019, after receiving new witness information, the police decided to reinvestigate the truth of Hall's death. After years of effort, on December 7, 2023, Steven was confirmed to be the murderer of Hall and was officially charged with her murder on May 22, 2024. Although Steven had been arrested for many years and had gone through several rounds of interrogation, his motive for the crime was never uncovered. Steven's father, Conrad, who was 73 years old, said after hearing about Steven's arrest that it was impossible. Steven could not be the killer. He was too foolish, not even knowing how to kill 5 people, take them away, and dispose of their remains in different places. As for why Steven's mother, Patricia, left home, there was a reason. She said that over time her marriage to Conrad became increasingly discordant and violent. She also tried to take Steven with her when she left Conrad, because Steven, under his father's strict discipline, became more and more reclusive. Mother's departure, father's discipline, stepmother's dislike, frequent moves during childhood, the inability to establish long-term friendships with people around him, and witnessing his father's violence all gradually distorted Steven's personality. Because he had never established long-term relationships since childhood, he preferred to use violence like his father to deal with his interpersonal relationships, such as marriage and those few sex workers he had been involved with.